The text message arrived at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that started like any other day in my carefully constructed hell. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. OMG, babe. Just got back from the doctor. We're having triplets. Can you believe it? This is going to be amazing for my brand. Love you so much. I stared at my phone screen in the cramped back office of my graphic design studio, surrounded by half-finished logos and energy drink cans. Sophia's message glowed like a neon warning sign, complete with enough emojis to make a teenager cringe. 3 babies, 3. What a surprise, I muttered to myself, my voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had become my default setting over the past year. Because here's the thing about surprises. They're only surprising when you haven't been paying attention to the obvious signs that your life is about to implode. My name is Ryan Carter, and I'm 30 years old. I design logos for small businesses, create wedding invitations for couples who actually love each other, and apparently serve as a prop in my girlfriend's Instagram fairy tale. Sophia calls me her husband online, though we never actually got married. It's better for her brand, she says. More relatable, more aspirational. I should probably mention that Sophia Martinez is what people call an influencer. She has 847,000 followers who hang on her every perfectly filtered word about organic smoothies, designer handbags she can't afford, and our supposedly perfect relationship. Her bio reads, "Living my best life with my amazing hubby, wellness, fashion, love." The reality is somewhat different. I haven't touched Sophia in 4 months. We sleep in the same bed in our downtown Chicago apartment, but we might as well be on different planets. She's always too tired, too stressed, or too busy planning her next content shoot. Meanwhile, I've been working 16-hour days trying to keep my struggling design business afloat while she spends money we don't have on ring lights and organic acai bowls. But triplets, that was news to me. I grabbed my jacket and headed out into the October chill, my mind racing. The walk from my studio to our apartment usually took 15 minutes, but today I needed the time to think. The Chicago streets were busy with the usual mix of tourists and locals, everyone bundled up against the wind that earned this city its nickname. Our building was one of those converted warehouses in River North, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that looked great on Instagram but cost a fortune to heat. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to our loft, my key turning in the lock just as Sophia's laughter echoed from inside. She wasn't alone. "Oh my God, Chris, you should have seen his face when I told him." Sophia's voice carried that particular pitch it got when she was excited about something devious. "He actually believed it. I swear, sometimes I think Ryan would believe anything I tell him." Chris Donovan's familiar laugh followed. Chris was Sophia's gay best friend. At least, that's how she introduced him to everyone. Tall, perfectly groomed, with the kind of effortless style that came from having rich parents and no real responsibilities. He spent most of his time at trendy cafes, underground clubs, and apparently our apartment. I stood in the entryway listening. "You're terrible," Chris said, but he sounded delighted. The poor guy's probably planning nurseries right now. "Please? Ryan doesn't plan anything. He just goes along with whatever I want. It's actually kind of pathetic." Something cold settled in my stomach. I stepped into the living room, and they both looked up from where they sat on our expensive white couch, the one Sophia had insisted we needed for her lifestyle posts. "Ryan!" Sophia jumped up, all smiles and energy. She was wearing one of those crop tops that showed off her flat stomach. Interesting choice for someone who was supposedly carrying triplets. "Did you get my message? Isn't it amazing?" Chris gave me his usual nod, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a piece of furniture. He was wearing a vintage band t-shirt that probably cost more than my rent and scrolling through his phone with manicured nails. "Yeah, amazing," I said. "Triplets? What are the odds?" "I know, right? Dr. Peterson said it's like 1 in 10,000 or something. We're so lucky." Sophia practically bounced as she spoke. "I already called my mom, and she's flying in next week to help plan the baby shower. This is going to be incredible content. I'm thinking we could do a whole series, Expecting Triplets, The Journey. Maybe even get a sponsorship deal with one of the baby brands. Of course, it always came back to the brand. That's great, babe. Really great." I looked at Chris, who was now taking selfies with our expensive coffee machine in the background. "Chris, you sticking around for dinner?" "Actually, I should probably head out," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Got plans tonight." "Hot date?" I asked. Something flickered across his face. Something like that. After Chris left, Sophia launched into full planning mode. She pulled out her laptop and started making lists, baby names, nursery themes, potential brand partnerships. I watched her work, noting how her eyes lit up when she talked about the business opportunities but glazed over when I mentioned practical things like doctor's appointments and childcare costs. "We should probably talk about logistics," I said. 3 babies are going to be expensive. Maybe I should look into expanding the business, taking on more clients. "Don't worry about money, babe. This pregnancy is going to open so many doors for us. I'm already getting DMs from brands wanting to work with me, organic baby food companies, stroller manufacturers, clothing lines. We're going to be fine." Us. Always us when it came to the money her content might generate, but somehow it was just her brand, her followers, her success when things went well. That night, lying in bed next to Sophia as she scrolled through pregnancy hashtags on her phone, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what I'd overheard. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about something else entirely. But that cold feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. The next few weeks passed in a blur of baby-related content creation. Sophia transformed our apartment into a pregnancy announcement photo shoot, complete with tiny shoes, ultrasound pictures, and enough props to stock a baby store. She hired a professional photographer for the reveal post, which got over 50,000 likes and hundreds of comments from followers gushing about our perfect love story. I played my part, smiling for the camera and posting supportive comments on her content, but privately, I was paying attention to things I'd ignored before, like how Sophia never seemed to have morning sickness, despite claiming to be in her first trimester, or how she could still fit into all her regular clothes without any visible changes to her body, or how Chris seemed to be around even more than usual, often staying late into the evening for planning sessions that I wasn't invited to join. My breaking point came on a Thursday night in November. I'd been working late at the studio trying to finish a logo design for a local restaurant when I realized I'd left my external hard drive at home. The client needed the files first thing in the morning, so I had no choice but to head back to the apartment. I expected to find Sophia asleep or editing content in bed. Instead, I found the living room empty and heard voices coming from our bedroom. The door was closed, but I could hear everything. "We need to be more careful," Chris was saying. "He's starting to ask questions." "Ryan doesn't ask questions. He just goes along with whatever I tell him." Sophia's voice was muffled, like she was lying down. "Besides, we're too far into this now to back out. The baby shower is next week, and I've already confirmed sponsorships with 3 different companies. Do you know how much money we're talking about?" "I know, but what happens when there are no actual babies? You can't fake a pregnancy forever." "I'm not faking anything. I am pregnant, just not with his babies." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. "All 3 of them?" Chris asked. "All 3 of them." I stood in our hallway, my hand frozen on the doorknob, as the pieces finally clicked into place. The late nights, the secretive conversations, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Chris wasn't gay, or at least not exclusively, and Sophia wasn't just using me as a prop for her social media presence. She was using me as a cover for her affair. I backed away from the door and grabbed my hard drive from the desk, moving as quietly as possible. My hands were shaking as I let myself out of the apartment and walked back to my studio through the cold Chicago night. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to my own business and spent the day at Mickey's boxing gym on the South Side. Mickey's was my escape from the Instagram perfect world I lived in, a no-frills place where guys came to hit things and nobody cared about your follower count. "You look like hell, Carter," said Tommy Reeves, my trainer. Tommy was in his 50s, built like a brick wall, and had the kind of street wisdom that came from growing up in neighborhoods where people didn't have the luxury of fake problems. "Feel like hell too," I said, wrapping my hands for a session with the heavy bag. "Woman trouble?" I started hitting the bag, putting all my frustration into each punch. "Something like that." "Want to talk about it?" "Want to find out if my girlfriend's been lying to me about everything for the past year." Tommy held the bag steady as I worked. "Only one way to find out for sure." "Yeah? What's that?" "Get proof?" That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Janet Pierce, and she worked out of a small office above a deli in Lincoln Park. She was probably 60, with gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my story without judgment and quoted me a price that would drain most of my savings account. "DNA test will tell you everything you need to know," she said. "But if you want to go that route, you'll need a sample from all parties involved." "How do I get that without them knowing?" Janet smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Leave that to me." 2 weeks later, Janet called me with results that confirmed what I already knew in my gut. The DNA test was conclusive. If Sophia was actually pregnant, which the investigator had also confirmed through a contact at the medical office, none of the 3 babies were mine. All 3 were Chris's. But that wasn't the most interesting part of Janet's report. "Your girlfriend and her friend have been planning this for months," Janet told me over coffee at a diner near her office. "I've got photos, text messages, emails. They've been setting up brand partnerships based on this pregnancy announcement. We're talking about serious money, 6 figures in potential sponsorship deals." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of email conversations between Sophia and various baby product companies, social media management firms, and even a talent agency that specialized in influencer families. "They're not just having an affair," I said, reading through the documents. "They're running a con." "Looks that way. The plan seems to be to milk the pregnancy for maximum brand value, then figure out the logistics later. Maybe break up with you after the babies are born, claim you couldn't handle being a father. She keeps the sponsorship money, the followers, and the sympathy." I closed the folder and looked out the diner window at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, Sophia was probably editing photos for her next post about our beautiful life together. Chris was probably helping her plan the baby shower that was happening this weekend, an event that would be attended by dozens of influencers and filmed for content. "What are you going to do?" Janet asked. I thought about all the nights I'd worked late to support Sophia's dreams, all the times I'd smiled for her camera and played the perfect boyfriend, all the money I'd spent on ring lights and photo equipment and organic groceries for her lifestyle brand. "I'm going to give them exactly what they're asking for," I said, "a show worth watching." The Moonrise Event Hall was exactly the kind of venue Sophia loved, all glass and chrome with Instagram-worthy lighting and a view of Lake Michigan. She'd rented it for the baby shower, spending money we definitely didn't have on decorations that spelled out 3 times the love, in gold balloons and flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I arrived early, wearing the navy blazer Sophia had picked out for me and carrying the speech I'd spent all week writing. The venue was already buzzing with activity, caterers setting up stations of organic finger foods, photographers testing their equipment, and Sophia's influencer friends arriving in designer outfits that they'd definitely be posting about later. "Ryan!" Sophia appeared at my elbow, radiant in a flowing pink dress that somehow managed to suggest a baby bump without actually showing one. "You look perfect, babe. Are you ready for this?" "More ready than you know," I said. The guest list was a who's who of Chicago's social media scene. Lifestyle bloggers, fashion influencers, and assorted hangers-on who made their living by looking pretty and selling products to people who couldn't afford them. Chris was there too, playing his role as the supportive gay best friend, wearing a vintage blazer and taking candid shots of Sophia for her Instagram stories. Sophia's mother, Elena Martinez, had flown in from Phoenix for the occasion. She was a smaller, older version of her daughter, with the same calculating eyes and the same ability to turn on charm like a faucet. She'd never particularly liked me. I wasn't successful enough for her daughter, but today she was all smiles and air kisses. "Ryan, mijo, you must be so excited," she said, gripping my arm with manicured nails. 3 grandbabies. I can hardly believe it." "It's definitely unbelievable," I agreed. The shower followed the usual script. Games involving baby bottles and diapers, a gift-opening session that was filmed from multiple angles, and speeches from various friends about how perfect Sophia and I were together. Through it all, I watched Chris and Sophia exchange glances and inside jokes, playing their parts perfectly. Finally, it was time for my speech. "Can I have everyone's attention?" I said, standing up with my champagne glass. The room quieted, phones coming out to record the moment. I wanted to say a few words about this incredible day. Sophia beamed at me from her decorated chair, surrounded by gift bags and flowers. Chris stood behind her, his phone out to capture the moment. "When Sophia first told me we were having triplets, I was shocked," I began. "I mean, what are the odds? 1 in 10,000, according to the doctor. It seemed almost too good to be true." Murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Someone called out, "So lucky!" "And then I started thinking about timing," I continued, "about biology, about the importance of being honest with the people you love." Sophia's smile faltered slightly. Chris lowered his phone. "So I did what any responsible father-to-be would do. I got a DNA test." The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished concrete floor. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded papers Janet had given me. Turns out those 1 in 10,000 odds were even more unlikely than we thought, because according to this lab report, I'm not the father of any of these babies. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the moment. "But Chris is," I said, looking directly at him. "All 3 of them. Congratulations, Daddy." The explosion of noise that followed was everything I could have hoped for. Guests started talking all at once. Phones came out to record the drama, and Sophia's mother let out a wail that could have been heard in the next county. Sophia jumped up from her chair, her face cycling through shock, anger, and panic. "Ryan, what are you doing? This is insane. You're ruining everything." "I'm ruining everything?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "I'm not the one who's been lying to 800,000 followers about whose babies I'm carrying." Chris had gone completely pale, backing away from Sophia's chair like it was radioactive. "I don't know what he's talking about," he stammered. "This is crazy. Ryan's obviously having some kind of breakdown." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of screenshots Janet had provided, because I've got text messages here between you two planning this whole thing, talking about brand deals and sponsorship money and how gullible I am. I started reading from the messages, my voice carrying over the chaos. Chris to Sophia, October 15th. He's so clueless, he'll never figure it out. Sophia to Chris, October 20th. The baby brands are already reaching out. This is going to make us rich. The influencer crowd was eating it up, phones recording every moment. This was the kind of drama that would be dissected on social media for weeks. Sophia's carefully curated image was crumbling in real time, and everyone wanted to be part of the story. "Stop it!" Sophia lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. "Those messages are private. You have no right." I had no right to know that my girlfriend was cheating on me, that she was using me as a prop in an elaborate con game. Elena Martinez had recovered from her initial shock and was now in full protective mother mode. "This is ridiculous," she declared. "Ryan is obviously jealous of Sophia's success. He's trying to sabotage her career." "Her career?" I looked around the room at all the phones recording us. "You mean her career built on lies? Her career built on pretending we have this perfect relationship while she's been sleeping with her gay best friend behind my back?" The crowd was loving every second of it. This was better than reality TV. This was real reality, happening live and unfiltered. I could already imagine the headlines: "Influencer's baby daddy drama," "Triplet scandal rocks social media," "The perfect life that wasn't." Chris finally found his voice. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, but his voice was shaking. "Ryan's obviously confused. Maybe we should all just calm down and—" "Confused?" I turned to face him directly. "I'm not confused about anything. I know exactly what's been going on. The question is, does your boyfriend Marcus know?" That hit home. Chris went from pale to green, and I knew I'd struck gold. Marcus Chen was Chris's official boyfriend, a sweet guy who worked as a nurse and genuinely believed Chris was faithful to him. He wasn't at the baby shower. Chris had told him it was girls only, but he'd be very interested to learn about Chris's extracurricular activities. "You wouldn't," Chris whispered. "Try me." Sophia was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and frustration. Her perfect plan was falling apart in front of an audience of her peers, and she knew her reputation would never recover. "I hate you," she said, her voice venomous. "I hate you so much. You're nothing, Ryan. You're a nobody with a failing business and no ambition. I was trying to build something beautiful, and you're destroying it out of spite." "Something beautiful?" I looked around the room at all the shocked faces, the phones recording everything, the expensive decorations celebrating a lie. "You call fraud beautiful? You call cheating beautiful? You call using me as a cover story for your affair beautiful?" The event photographer, a professional who'd been hired to capture the magical moments of the baby shower, was still taking pictures. But instead of posed shots of gift opening and cake cutting, she was documenting the complete implosion of an influencer's carefully constructed life. Security guards appeared at the edges of the room. The venue management had clearly decided this drama was bad for business, but it was too late to contain the damage. The story was already spreading across social media, shared and reshared by everyone who'd witnessed it firsthand. I looked at Sophia one last time, this woman I'd thought I loved, who'd been using me as a prop in her elaborate performance. "You wanted content for your brand," I said. "Congratulations. You just went viral for all the wrong reasons." And with that, I walked out of the Moonrise event hall, leaving behind the wreckage of 3 years of my life and the sound of Sophia's mother screaming at anyone who would listen that this was all a terrible mistake. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The fallout from the baby shower was immediate and brutal. By the time I got back to my apartment that evening, Shaq's Triplets scandal was trending on Twitter, and my phone was buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Sophia had beaten me home and was pacing around our living room like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it costs," she was saying to someone. I need crisis management, and I need it now. This is salvageable. We can spin this. She saw me come in and ended the call. We need to talk. I think we've said everything we need to say. You don't understand what you've done, she said, her voice shaking with anger. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost me? How many opportunities you just destroyed? Your opportunities were built on lies, Sophia. They were never real. Everything I've worked for, gone. 3 years of building my brand, building my following, building relationships with sponsors, gone because you couldn't handle the truth about us. I sat down on our expensive white couch and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still perfectly put together even after the disaster at the baby shower. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she was already planning her next move. The truth about us? I repeated. You mean the truth that there is no us? That there never was? We were good together, Ryan. We worked. I gave you a life you never could have had on your own. You got to be part of something bigger, something important. I got to be your prop. You got to matter. The words hung between us like a slap. This was what she really thought of me, that I was nothing without her, that my life had no value except as a supporting character in her story. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Pierce. Check your email. You're going to want to see this. I opened my laptop and found a message with several attachments, more screenshots, more evidence of the elaborate con Sophia and Chris had been running. But this batch was different. These were communications with baby product companies, talent agencies, and even a production company that had been interested in developing a reality show around Sophia's pregnancy. Holy shit, I muttered, scrolling through the documents. What now? Sophia demanded. Did you know there was a TV deal on the table? Expecting Triplets, a modern family story? They were offering you $250,000 for the first season. Sophia's face went white. How did you get that? The same way I got everything else. You're not as careful as you think you are. I kept reading. The production company had been planning to follow Sophia through her pregnancy and the first year of the triplets' lives. They wanted to document our relationship, our preparations for parenthood, the challenges of raising 3 babies. It would have been a massive payday for Sophia, enough money to set her up for life. And it was all based on the lie that I was the father. You were going to put our fake relationship on television, I said. You were going to make me sign contracts, appear on camera, pretend to be a happy family, all while carrying another man's children. It would have been good for both of us. It would have been fraud, Sophia. Actual, prosecutable fraud. She was crying again, but this time the tears seemed real. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The followers, the sponsors, the constant need to create content. I built something from nothing, Ryan. I made myself into a brand, into a business. And it's all falling apart because you couldn't just play along. Play along with what? With being cuckolded on national television? With raising another man's children while pretending they're mine? With helping you commit fraud against major corporations? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. Chris and I, it just happened. And when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. But then I saw the opportunity, and I thought maybe we could make it work. Maybe we could turn it into something positive. For who? For you and Chris? What about me? What about Marcus? What about the babies? She didn't have an answer for that. Over the next few days, I watched Sophia's world crumble in real time. The baby shower video had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Her follower count was dropping by the hour as people realized they'd been invested in a fake relationship. Sponsors were pulling out of deals, demanding refunds for products they'd already sent her. The lifestyle bloggers and influencers who'd been at the baby shower were now creating their own content about the scandal, dissecting every moment and sharing their insider perspectives on the drama. Sophia had become the cautionary tale of what happens when influencer culture goes too far. But Chris was having an even worse time. Marcus Chen had seen the videos and immediately confronted his boyfriend about the allegations. When Chris tried to deny everything, Marcus demanded a DNA test of his own. The results confirmed what everyone already knew. Chris was the father of Sophia's triplets, and he'd been lying to Marcus about their entire relationship. The breakup was spectacular and very public. Marcus, who had his own modest social media following as a healthcare worker, posted a long, heartfelt message about betrayal and trust that went viral in its own right. He included screenshots of his conversations with Chris, photos they'd taken together, and a timeline that made it clear Chris had been living a double life for months. Chris's reputation in Chicago's gay community was destroyed overnight. The clubs where he'd been a regular suddenly didn't want him around. His friends stopped returning his calls. Even his wealthy parents, who'd been supporting his lifestyle, cut him off when the scandal reached their social circle. But I still wasn't satisfied. The DNA test and the baby shower confrontation had exposed their affair, but it hadn't addressed the bigger issue, the fraud they'd been planning to commit. The TV deal, the sponsorship money, the elaborate con they'd been running on hundreds of thousands of followers. That's when I decided to make one final move. I called the production company that had been interested in the reality show and requested a meeting. I told them I had information about their potential stars that they needed to hear before moving forward with any contracts. The meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room in a downtown office building. 3 executives listened as I laid out the evidence of Sophia and Chris's deception, the fake relationship, the paternity fraud, the planned con. I showed them the text messages, the email chains, the DNA test results. "So you're telling us," said the lead executive, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, "that we almost entered into a $250,000 contract based on completely false premises?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." "And you have documentation of all of this?" I slid a folder across the table. "Everything you need." The executive opened the folder and spent several minutes reviewing the contents. When she looked up, her expression was ice cold. "Mr. Carter, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I can assure you that we'll be taking appropriate action." "What kind of action?" "The kind that involves lawyers and lawsuits and criminal fraud charges." 3 days later, Sophia and Chris were served with papers. The production company was suing them for attempted fraud and seeking damages for the time and money they'd invested in developing the show. Several of the baby product sponsors were joining the lawsuit, claiming they had been deceived into partnerships based on false information. But the real blow came when the Illinois Attorney General's office announced they were opening an investigation into influencer fraud and using Sophia's case as a test case for new regulations on social media advertising. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my design studio, working on logos for honest small businesses while Sophia's empire crumbled around her. She'd moved back in with her mother in Phoenix, her social media accounts deleted, her influencer career over. Chris had disappeared entirely. Some people said he'd moved to Los Angeles to try to reinvent himself. Others claimed he'd gone back to his parents' house in Connecticut to hide from the lawsuits. Either way, he was no longer a factor in Chicago's social scene. And Marcus? He'd started a new Instagram account called Nurse Marcus Tells the Truth, where he shared stories about healthcare, honest relationships, and the dangers of social media deception. It was gaining followers every day, people who were hungry for authenticity after being burned by too many fake influencers. As for me, I was finally free. Free from the constant pressure to perform for Sophia's cameras, free from the financial drain of supporting her lifestyle, free from the nagging feeling that I was living someone else's life. My business was actually doing better than ever. The publicity from the scandal had brought me new clients who appreciated my honesty and straightforward approach. I'd hired an assistant and moved to a bigger studio space, and I'd started dating someone new. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she was everything Sophia wasn't. She worked as a paramedic, had no interest in social media fame, and thought the whole influencer culture was ridiculous. She was real, honest, and genuinely kind, qualities I'd almost forgotten existed. But the story wasn't quite over yet. 6 months after the baby shower disaster, I thought I was done with Sophia Martinez and Chris Donovan forever. I was wrong. It started with a phone call from Janet Pierce on a rainy Thursday morning in April. "You need to see something," she said. "Can you meet me at the diner in an hour?" I found Janet waiting in our usual booth, a manila folder on the table in front of her. She looked grim. "They're back," she said without preamble. "Who's back?" "Sophia and Chris, and they're planning something." She opened the folder to reveal a new set of photographs and documents. Sophia was back in Chicago, staying at an upscale hotel downtown. Chris was with her, and according to Janet's surveillance, they'd been meeting with lawyers, publicists, and what looked like a documentary crew. A documentary crew. Apparently, they're trying to spin this whole thing as a story about social media bullying and revenge. They want to paint themselves as the victims and you as the villain who destroyed their lives out of jealousy. I looked through the photos. Sophia looked different, thinner, harder, with a desperation in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Chris looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months. "There's more," Janet said. "They've been reaching out to people from the baby shower, trying to get them to change their stories, offering money for interviews that support their version of events. And some of them are taking the deal. Turns out loyalty is pretty cheap when you're facing your own financial problems." This was a problem. If Sophia and Chris could successfully reframe the narrative, they might be able to rehabilitate their reputations and potentially even beat the lawsuits against them. Worse, they might be able to turn the whole thing around and make me look like the bad guy. "What's their endgame?" I asked. "Best guess? They want to create enough doubt about what really happened that they can negotiate settlements on the lawsuits and maybe even launch a comeback. The documentary would be their platform to tell their side of the story. I thought about Jennifer, about the quiet life we'd been building together, about my business, which was finally thriving, about the peace I'd found after escaping Sophia's toxic world. I'm not going to let them do this, I said. What did you have in mind? I want to know everything about this documentary. Who's funding it, who's making it, when they're planning to release it. Everything, Janet smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. It took her 3 days to get the information I needed. The documentary was being produced by a small company in Los Angeles that specialized in redemption stories, about fallen celebrities and internet personalities. The funding was coming from an anonymous investor who Janet suspected was actually Chris's wealthy father trying to rehabilitate his son's reputation. The documentary was scheduled to premiere at a film festival in 2 months, with a wider release planned for streaming platforms afterward. The narrative they were pushing was that Sophia and Chris were young people who'd made mistakes but had been unfairly persecuted by a vindictive ex-boyfriend who couldn't handle their success. They'd already filmed interviews with several people from the baby shower, all of whom now claimed that I'd seemed unstable and jealous in the weeks leading up to the event. They'd found a psychologist who was willing to speculate about narcissistic rage and social media-induced paranoia without ever having met me. But the centerpiece of their defense was going to be a claim that the DNA test had been faked. They're saying you bribed the lab technician, Janet explained. They've got someone who's willing to testify that you offered him money to falsify the results. That's insane. The test was legitimate. We have documentation. Documentation can be forged, and if they can create enough doubt about the paternity test, everything else falls apart. The affair becomes a misunderstanding, the business deals become ambitious planning, and you become the crazy ex who destroyed 2 innocent people's lives. I stared out the diner window at the Chicago skyline, feeling the same cold anger that had sustained me through the original confrontation. They weren't content to just disappear and start over somewhere else. They wanted to win. They wanted to rewrite history and make themselves the heroes of their own story. When are they filming the final interviews? I asked. Next week. They've rented a penthouse suite at the Fairmont for what they're calling the emotional climax of the documentary. Sophia and Chris telling their truth, asking for forgiveness, talking about the healing process. The Fairmont. I knew the hotel well. It was one of Chicago's most expensive, with panoramic views of the city and Lake Michigan. Very dramatic. Very cinematic. What are you thinking, Ryan? I'm thinking it's time to give them the climax they're really looking for. The plan took a week to set up, and it required calling in every favor I had. Tommy from the boxing gym knew a guy who worked security at the Fairmont. Jennifer's paramedic partner had a friend who worked in the hotel's catering department. Janet had contacts in the local media who were still interested in the ongoing story of Chicago's most notorious influencer scandal. The documentary crew had reserved the penthouse suite for an entire afternoon, planning to film Sophia and Chris in what they called a safe space, where they could be vulnerable and honest about their experiences. The suite had floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and multiple camera angles to capture their emotional testimony. What they didn't know was that I had access to the service elevator. I arrived at the Fairmont at 2 p.m., dressed in catering staff uniform and carrying a tray of champagne glasses. The security guard at the service entrance was Tommy's friend, who waved me through without a second glance. The catering manager was Jennifer's contact, who'd added me to the staff list for the afternoon. I took the service elevator to the penthouse floor and used the key card the catering manager had provided to access the suite through the kitchen entrance. I could hear voices from the main room, Sophia and Chris being interviewed by the documentary filmmaker. The hardest part, Sophia was saying, was realizing that someone I trusted, someone I loved, could be so cruel. Ryan wasn't the person I thought he was. I set up my phone to record and stepped into the main room. You're absolutely right, I said. I'm not the person you thought I was. The room erupted into chaos. Sophia screamed. Chris jumped up from his chair, knocking over a glass of water. The documentary crew scrambled to figure out what was happening, their cameras still rolling. What are you doing here? The filmmaker demanded. This is a private shoot. You can't just... Actually, I can, I said, pulling out a legal document. This is a cease and desist order regarding the use of my name and likeness in your documentary. You've been served. I handed the paper to the filmmaker, then turned to face Sophia and Chris. They both looked terrible. Older, thinner, desperate. The months of legal battles and public humiliation had taken their toll. So this is your big comeback plan? I said. Rewrite history, play the victims, hope people forget that you're fraudsters and cheaters? Get out, Sophia said, but her voice was shaking. You have no right to be here. I have every right, especially since you've been using my name to commit defamation in your little documentary here. I looked directly into the documentary camera, which was still recording. For the record, everything I exposed about these two people was true. The affair, the fake pregnancy announcement, the planned fraud against sponsors and production companies. I have documentation of all of it, and it's been verified by multiple independent sources. Turn off the camera, Chris said desperately. Turn it off now. But the filmmaker was clearly fascinated by this unexpected turn of events. This was better drama than anything they'd planned to capture. The DNA test was legitimate, I continued. The paternity results are accurate, and the business communications proving they planned to defraud sponsors and TV producers are all authentic. Anyone who claims otherwise is either lying or being paid to lie. You're insane, Sophia said, but there was no conviction in her voice. You've been stalking us, harassing us, trying to destroy our lives because you can't accept that I chose someone else. You didn't choose someone else, Sophia. You chose to lie to everyone, including yourself. You built your entire life on deception, and when it collapsed, you blamed everyone except the person responsible. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence Janet had compiled. Should we go through it all again? The text messages where you and Chris laughed about how gullible I was? The emails with sponsors where you lied about the paternity of your children? The production company contracts you signed under false pretenses? Stop, Chris said. Just stop. Or what? You'll have me arrested for trespassing? Go ahead. I'm sure the police would love to hear about your documentary full of lies and defamation. The filmmaker was clearly torn between shutting down the cameras and continuing to record what was obviously going to be the most dramatic footage they'd captured. Here's what's going to happen, I said, addressing all of them. You're going to scrap this documentary. You're going to stop giving interviews about me. You're going to accept responsibility for your actions and face the consequences like adults. And if we don't? Sophia asked. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then I release everything. Every text message, every email, every piece of evidence I have about your fraud. I give it all to the prosecutors, the civil attorneys, and the media. And instead of being a cautionary tale about social media gone wrong, you become a criminal case study. The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. You've already lost, I continued. Your careers are over, your reputations are destroyed, and you're facing lawsuits that will follow you for years. The only question now is whether you want to make it worse by continuing to lie about what happened. Sophia was crying now, real tears this time. We just wanted a chance to start over. Then start over somewhere else with new identities and leave me out of your story. I looked at the documentary filmmaker. As for you, I suggest you find a different subject for your redemption story. These two aren't victims and they're not redeemable. They're just criminals who got caught. I turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Oh, and Sophia? I hope the triplets turn out better than their parents. They deserve that much. And with that, I walked out of the penthouse suite, leaving behind the wreckage of their final attempt to rewrite history. The documentary was never released. The production company quietly shelved the project after receiving my cease and desist order and reviewing the evidence I'd provided. The anonymous investor, who was indeed Chris's father, pulled his funding rather than risk further legal exposure. Sophia and Chris left Chicago the following week. I heard through Janet's network that they'd moved to different cities, taken different names, and were trying to rebuild their lives away from the social media world that had made and destroyed them. The lawsuits continued, but without the documentary to muddy the waters, the legal proceedings moved forward smoothly. Both Sophia and Chris were found liable for fraud and ordered to pay substantial damages to the companies they'd deceived. As for me, I went back to my quiet life with Jennifer, my growing business, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth wins out over carefully crafted lies. 6 months later, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a birth announcement. 3 beautiful babies, 2 boys and a girl, born healthy and safe. There was no note, but I recognized Sophia's handwriting on the envelope. I looked at the photos of the triplets, innocent children who had no part in their parents' deceptions, and felt something I hadn't expected. Forgiveness. Not for Sophia and Chris, but for myself. For the 3 years I'd spent living someone else's life. For the time I'd wasted on revenge. For the anger I'd carried long after it had served its purpose. I threw the birth announcement away and went home to Jennifer, to our real life, to our honest future.